So, Josh, you and I have talked about Indian cinema offline plenty of times. I think at least it's come up a couple times. But what's interesting to me is you've been kind of much more at the forefront of this for a lot longer than I have. So I don't know, maybe we should have talked about something that's a little bit more... I don't know if this movie's that important to Indian cinema as a whole, but this is a fun movie, as it were. I don't know if... I mean, again, there's a lot of things that can be talked about in terms of the meaning and message of the movie as it applies to the Indian culture, which, I mean, again, there have been several movies. Badhai Do is another one that's very, again, kind of pushing the social message and pushing a kind of more progressive message. And I think that this movie is kind of in that camp of other Karan Johar films. But I'm kind of curious, before we talk about this movie specifically, tell the audience of the Kulturecast a little bit about your kind of experience with Indian cinema and how long you have been in the world of Indian cinema and what that means for you.
Okay, yeah. I've been writing about Indian films for about 15 years now. I've been watching them for a little bit longer than that. My interest very quickly turned into to writing. A year or two after I started watching, I would just became insatiable and consumed a lot of films in those first couple of years, and just found it amazing that no one was talking about them. You didn't really hear anything about Indian films unless you were Indian back in whatever 2007, 2008, or before that even.
Right.
That I didn't know much about them at that point.
There was like one place to go see them in North Texas for the longest time too.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that we kind of do share is, I would say, I probably left North Texas right as it was kind of becoming a thing. And now it's way more of a thing in North Texas than it ever was. But Fun Asia used to be it. That was it. You can go there, and now they have it at Cinemark. Cinemark's just showing Indian cinema. And not just not just Hindi language stuff, like Telugu, Tamil as well.
Yeah, I mean the market has definitely expanded, and they've been trying to get some of those Indian dollars, the Indian film viewing dollars, which you can't blame them. I mean, the movies make money. So, writing turned into film programming at festivals, and that turned into festival consulting and strategy, which turned into marketing and sort of a sideline and distribution. And so I've got my finger in all those pies right now, trying to figure out how I can best support these films from this country that I've grown to love. And talking about them, writing about them, sharing them seems to be working pretty well. We've managed to get a couple of things, some recognition. So I'm happy about that.
And for those in the audience that may not know, you worked directly with the marketing for Triple R, right?
Yeah. I was
a big thing you worked on, right?
Yeah, I was on the U.S. distribution team for Triple R when the second run of the film starting in the summer of 2022, and so I was along for that ride. I'd known the director Rajamouli for a very long time, who gets name checked in this movie,
right?
And so that was a sort of a test to see if Indian films could work in a different space outside of their, natural audience. And, we thought it might work, but I don't know that we knew it would work as well as it did. So hopefully we can keep moving in that direction.
Well, and what's funny is, obviously, I mean, again, I don't have to tell you this, but for those listening who aren't as familiar with Triple R, I don't know, that's the thing. Like, I feel like at this point, if you're a certain film goer in this country and you watch certain movies, there's no way you couldn't have heard of it, because even people I know who had never seen a single Indian film before watched Triple R. And I feel like that was a big part of it was the push on Netflix to make it like front and center on the front page of Netflix for people that were never watching anything close to that before, at least not in terms of international cinema. Like, I think international cinema is something that everyone in this country should be exposed to, but I don't think it necessarily is. But for some reason, and I'm sure you were obviously part of it, Triple R got pushed rather hard on Netflix. so that people would be exposed to it?
I mean, we didn't have anything to do with Netflix. We just did the theatrical stuff. But you know, it picked up some steam on social media, you know, in little clips, because one of the things that Indian film has always been really good about is that even the worst films are sometimes really good in really small increments, you know, in very small scenes. It's just that RRR is nothing but those small scenes that sort of blow your mind. That's all the whole film is that. And that's not terribly normal. And so when it, you know, we started working on it and pushing it and talking about it and started the marketing going and getting all of our, you know, publicity moving in the immediate run up to our theatrical re-release was right about the same time. Actually, it's a long convoluted story, but the Netflix was supposed to release it the day after our theatrical re-release, but Netflix pushed the date up for themselves 2 weeks. So we had been essentially doing marketing for this film during those 2 weeks anyway. And when it came out on Netflix, it got a little bit of a push there as well. So it was frustrating because we had planned to have our movie back in theaters before it hit Netflix. And then Netflix decided that they were going to sort of jump the gun on that, but it worked out in our favor because people saw it and thought rightfully that they really wish they could see this in a room full of people on a big, huge screen. And a lot of them did.
Well, and to your point, I mean, I think the expectation for Indian cinema is based on, I think rightfully so, maybe again, like maybe not, some stereotypes that, I mean, RRR does kind of lean into, like, I mean, and that's the thing. On this episode of the Kulturecast, I am still Chris Stachiw, much to the chagrin of many, and I am joined by, again, someone who has seen a hell of a lot more Indian cinema than I have. You can find him on latest release is the Steelbook release for The Green Room. No.
Yeah, the limited edition Second Sight UK 4K disc of Green Room that just came out this last week.
And you're in that. You're in the booklet. Yeah, you have a
I have an essay in there. Yeah, I have an essay coming out soon. I know they have them on Fractured Vision's new Blu-ray release of Doberman, the French action film from the around 2000. So that should be coming out here pretty soon too. That's been announced already, so I'm excited about that one also.
Josh Hurtado is joining me. Clearly, I haven't even said your name. Jesus, I'll just keep introducing you without saying your name. And like we've kind of alluded to on this episode of the Kulturecast, it's finally April, which means I programmed a month. And this month I wanted to do Indian cinema, not necessarily just Hindi language films. However, this is firmly a Hindi language film. It is in a lot of ways, I almost say like the stereotypical Indian movie of a certain kind, especially, I mean, and I would say the person directing it has definitely done this a couple times before. But on this episode of the Kulturecast, we're kicking off Bollywood Cinema Month, Indian Cinema Month, with Rani Kii Prem Kahaani, otherwise known as Rocky and Rani's Love Story.
Rocky Randhawa, this side. Shit, यार आप तो मुझे full checkout मार रहे हो?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to objectify you. I was.
कोई objection नहीं है जी. ताड़ लो जितना ताड़ना देखने की चीज़ है बड़ी मेहनत से बनाई है जी. All natural, no steroid. आज सुनिए.
आई बरेली में तो बीच बाजारी जब हुस्न दिखाने जाएगी.
रानी तुझे लगता है तू ही educated है ना? Problem यही है तू ना मुझे डफर समझती है. चल आज तू कुछ पूछ के देख. Google के चीथड़े नहीं फाड़ दिए ना. मेरा नाम भी रॉकी रंधावा नहीं है.
वेस्ट बंगाल इंडिया में किधर है?
वेस्ट में, but of you.
ईस्ट में है. But
ये
that's
ट्रिक क्वेश्चन था. ये बात तो फोन पे भी हो सकती थी.
लेकिन फिर मैं तुम्हें चेकआउट कैसे बता?
पिघला के मारी.
What झुमका?
कार्ड छपवा दे, मंडप सजा दे, घोड़ी पे सवार आ रहा है रानी का राजा.
Hold your horses. See, the problem is कि हमारी families बहुत अलग है.
रिश्ते का स्टीयरिंग व्हील चाहे अपना हाथ में हो, बैक सीट ड्राइविंग फैमिली करता है.
फिर क्या चाहती क्या है? मैं आके रह जाऊं तेरी फैमिली के साथ, तू मेरी फैमिली के साथ आके
अब
रहेगी?
तू रैंडम चीजें सजेस्ट कर रहा है कि तू मेरी फैमिली के साथ आके रहे। मैं oh my god, genius. It's a switch. 3 महीने के लिए तू मेरे घर पे और मैं तेरे घर पे। अगर ये सर्वाइव कर गए ना तो शायद शादी के अगले 50 साल भी सर्वाइव कर लेंगे।
स्विच। दादाजी 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 दादाजी।
हाय, ये श्री रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर है।
आई नो।
मात्र 42% वोटिंग तो हमारा नेशनल ड्यूटी है सिटीजन्स।
मैं तो वोट देना ही बंद कर दिया। मैं तो कहता हूँ आप भी बंद ही कर दो, क्या फायदा? शमीता तो है नहीं। शमीता
कौन सी कॉन्स्टिट्यूंसी से है?
बिग बॉस।
ना क्लास ना एजुकेशन, तुम इस लड़के के साथ शादी के बारे में सोच भी कैसे सकती हो? इन दोनों की प्रेम कहानी की औकात मैंने न दिखाई तो मेरा नाम भी धनलक्ष्मी नहीं खेला हो गया।
और तू सही कहती है, हम दोनों बहुत अलग हैं और कितनी भी कोशिश कर लेना हमारे बीच के फर्क खत्म नहीं हुए।
फर्क तो खत्म नहीं होगी अगर ये रिश्ता खत्म हो चुका है रॉकी।
घर नहीं तोड़ा करते।
वो आंटी कपड़ों के बारे में पूछ रहा था। लॉन्ड्री
बेडरूम में जाके अपना कपड़ा निकालो, मैं आता हूँ। बेडरूम में जाकर अपना कपड़ा निकालो, मैं आता हूँ।
गलत होगा आंटी, आप रानी मम्मी है।
अरे बाबा, नहीं।
The film is directed by Karan Johar. It stars Dharmendra, Alia Bhatt, Ranveer Singh, and Jaya Bachchan. And if you can't tell, yes, the leads are Alia Bhatt and Ranveer Singh. Ranveer Singh plays the titular Rani, and Alia Bhatt plays the titular Rani. And the two of them fall in and out of love and have to prove to one another that they can live up to the standards of each other's family, along with unraveling a subplot of there's a lot going on here. It's very similar to a lot of other movies that Karan Johar has directed. So I'm going to kick it to you first, Josh. What did you think of RARKPK? Because that's probably how it's wanting to be referred to at this point.
That's too many letters. I
agree with you there.
I really liked Rocky or Rani. It's I've kind of been lamenting the lack of films like this over the last several years. There's no shortage of romance films in Hindi cinema. I mean, there are plenty of those. But the way that someone like Karan Johar makes them, that's a different, sort of stratosphere of melodrama, of, scale, opulence, visual, aesthetic, kind of everything. Characters are huge. Everything is big about the film, and it's really easy to do that poorly. But he has a pretty firm grasp on what the audience wants, and I think I'm a part of the audience that wants this. I really enjoyed this movie.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Karan Johar's first two films are kind of like what this is more or less readdressing, which is how do we do this 20 plus years after I've done it the first. I mean, again, I don't know if Kuch Kuch Hota Hai or K3G is a bigger movie. I mean, those are both big deals in their own way. And I think that they're both movies that are very interesting. And I think that this movie is firmly in that camp because for me, it's similar to DDLJ in that it's a romantic comedy, but there is a point. There is something to say. And in this movie, there's kind of the interesting comment of, a woman's place in what is being assumed to be a progressive or, positioning itself as a much more progressive Indian society, which, I mean, is a conversation that is being had and needs to be had, not just in India, but I think, around the world, but obviously with a culture like India, which is, again, can be rather conservative. Obviously, this is an interesting and I think timely conversation to be had. And that brings me back to something like, Kuch Kuch Hota Hai or K3G, and that it's not just a movie about, characters falling in and out of love and the kind of almost Shakespearean machinations going on around them, but there's also something at the heart of it that it's saying is not okay or isn't great in Indian culture and wishes it could change it. And again, is showing what it would look like if people did actually change. And it change isn't easy. I mean, that's the thing, Badhai Do came out in 2022, and that's about that's like the first time a gay marriage and gay characters have really been represented like that. So, and that's from a couple of years ago. So I enjoy this movie. It is very much exactly what I was expecting it to be, though, just by the look of it. I mean, and I think I appreciate that the most about it. And it's kind of redeemed Ranveer Singh in a way, because the last thing I saw him in was Circus, and oh boy, that movie was kind of rough compared to this one.
And Ranveer Singh is an interesting performer, an interesting actor. What you see in Rocky or Rani, as over the top as his character is, and we'll talk about the way his character acts. That's basically his public persona in general. It's not just in the film. And so, right. If you ever see him doing interviews or on red carpets or anything like that, he's always dressed in some outlandish thing. He's always kind of going over the top, very, very demonstrative with his physicality all the time, right. To the point where it's kind of exhausting. And I don't particularly enjoy his public persona. It feels like he's never off. It feels performative all the time.
He's always on, as it were.
Yeah, always on. And, it takes a special kind of film or the right kind of film to harness that into something that works. And I think Rocky or Rani is definitely that. It takes the character that is Ranveer Singh and creates the character that is Rocky Randhawa, and they are close enough that I'm not annoyed by this person in the film, because it's clearly a character that's built around his own personality. In a way, dialed up a few dozen notches, but still essentially him.
Right.
And, and when he's not cast in those roles, it's a little bit more difficult to take, because he does that sort of high pitch acting that he doesn't go over in every single kind of film. So yeah, he can be hit or miss for me, but he's a solid hit in this one.
And I totally agree. The only other thing that I want to say I've seen him in is Gully Boy, which is a very different kind of movie. And that performance, I think, is interesting in comparison to these two, because that is a much quieter performance. Yes, it is very much the center of that film. And obviously, he's the main character. He is the titular Gully Boy in that film. And it's very much an 8 Mile, but set in, is it set in Mumbai, I think?
I believe so.
I mean, that character is very different from these two characters, but the character that he plays in Circus and the character in this movie are very much similar in terms of the high energy thing. And you're right. I mean, if you watch him in, speaking of Netflix, the Netflix documentary, The Romantics, he's always on. Like, yeah. And I get it. Like, as someone who, again, like anyone who makes content kind of feels like, well, at what point are you on and off? So I kind of get that problem, because again, like, you grapple with how much of this is for real and how much of this is him playing it up for, again, the benefit of his audience, who I think you would agree love that and eat it up, like, period. Yeah. And then he knows that, which is why he does it. I do, and I was wondering if you were going to bring it up, but I'm glad you brought it up more or less immediately. The meta nature of the movie is interesting. That, yeah, the character of Rocky is pretty much just Ranveer Singh. And yeah, I totally get why it would not be something that would resonate with, again, like, with a certain kind of audience. And I'm kind of with you in that sense. Like, it is a bit much. But I think here it is obviously, like, we know that this is a problem. And it's essentially being addressed immediately in the movie that this guy's a ding dong, and they need to he needs to transform in the movie as much as, again, like the person in real life maybe needs to, or again, maybe I don't think that there is a reality here that this isn't a thing that he's aware of. I think he just leans into it. I think the movie's expectation is that's the kind of character you're going to play, and he doesn't disappoint in that regard. Same with Alia Bhatt. Like, this is very similar to other characters I've seen her play as well. And she's fantastic here too. I mean, I love her in everything I've seen her in.
Yeah, she's very good. And, there's a big, I mean, we've talked about it, or in the US, not we particularly, but in the US, there's been a big pushback against the idea of the Nepo baby. And nowhere does that exist more obviously than in the land of Indian film. I mean, it's almost all of the major performers are descended from some branch of someone's family tree that was in the business or in entertainment in some way. And Alia Bhatt, her family is no different. They come from, producers and directors. Mukesh Bhatt, the Bhatt family, Vikram Bhatt, all those people have long histories in film. What's interesting, though, about the way that she's sort of developed over the years is that her career has taken a turn towards the more serious mainstream stuff, or even like this sort of masala mainstream stuff, whereas her family's films have historically been more in the genre space, exploitation, B movies, that kind of thing. And so she's kind of escaped that part of her family's film lineage. And she's done great. I mean, she's done really well for herself. She's made a lot of really good films over the years. She's just like any other star, made some kind of bad ones too. But I think at this point, the good ones are outweighing the other, and people are really recognizing her as one of the most talented actresses that Hindi cinema has to offer.
Well, and her chemistry with Ranveer Singh is really great. Like, the two of them play really well off of one another. And I mean, again, speaking of Gully Boy, she was in Gully Boy opposite Ranveer Singh. I like her more here because, again, like, I think that they really go on they go on a further journey as characters together. And in Gully Boy, I don't necessarily remember her character getting an arc as much as, his does in that movie. But in this movie, they both get a pretty interesting arc as characters, because he starts out as very much like a ding-dong. And by the end of the movie, I would say he's as close to being in touch with his feelings and reality as any character can be in any one of these movies. I mean, again, to the same point where like a Shah Rukh Khan and DDLJ gets to, where it's like, all right, he understands everything and he's ready now. And that Ranveer Singh character gets there, and it's believable, which again, I think, to your point, like, is a credit to how good the two of them are as actors, because she really is if anything, he's her equal. I think that what she's being given is a little bit more interesting because in a lot of ways, the female perspective in the Indian movies is not always the one that we're getting. If not, they're just being sidelined completely, which we've talked about a lot on Bollywood Cinema Club, where sometimes the writing for the female characters is a little lacking. And I would say it is far from lacking in this movie.
Oh, no. And I think that's one thing that definitely Karan Johar's films do well, is they treat their female characters with the respect that they deserve. Most of the characters in this film that are worth a shit are women, exactly, that are given any kind of story at all. She's great. We did mention her off the top, but Shabana Azmi is another very talented old school actress who's been working for decades and doing really, really great stuff. She plays a woman who had a brief fling with Dharmendra in their younger years, who is reconnected with in order to help him regain his memory. And it gets messy in terms of his own current marriage, which is not great to begin with. But like all of the main 5 or 6 characters all have, tremendous CVs. They go back years.
Right.
Dharmendra and and Jaya Bachchan were both in Sholay together. They weren't partnered up in that one. Jaya was partnered with her soon-to-be husband, Amitabh Bachchan,
Right.
and Dharmendra was paired up with Hema Malini. But they were both in those films, and it's interesting because in that film, Dharmendra was playing kind of a tough guy in order to save the village, and he spent most of the 80s and 90s playing like big, burly, tough action guys.
Right.
And his kids also still have that sort of reputation. Sunny Deol and Bobby Deol. Sunny Deol in particular is sort of a big action guy, and Bobby Deol is kind of making a comeback as a supporting character, a character actor. I love him. And Dharmendra has to sort of pull way back in this because he's essentially comatose the entire film, or in a catatonic state for most of the film. But he's really wonderful.
It's an interesting choice for him in this movie, right?
Yeah.
To sideline, because again, you mentioned Sholay, which we covered, a couple of years ago at this point. And like, it's interesting because this is such a different role for him. It's such a, again, like out of the way. I mean, Jaya Bachchan has more going on in the movie than he does. And I mean, again, she's playing a character very similar to other characters she's played, because she's in Kuch Hota Hai, or right? Yeah.
Well, she's in a lot of stuff.
Well, she's in she's in K3G and Kuch. Or no, she's in K3G is what it is. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, she plays Amitabh's wife in that movie, the mother of Shah Rukh Khan. So yeah, she's great. She doesn't work as much anymore because she's involved in politics these days. But when she does, she's solid.
And I like her in this movie. I mean, again, it's a role that could have gotten lost in the shuffle of another movie like this, because again, some of these other movies don't have the generational love story. I found that to be interesting. The Dharmendra part of the film with Shabana Azmi, like that was the interesting part of the movie for me, because again, like that felt like where the movie had part of its message was coming from, was their relationship. Because again, in a K3G or Kuch Hota Hai, it's more like, lost love or someone passes away. This one is, again, a relationship being committed out of wedlock, which again, they don't necessarily hang a lantern on it in the movie. They kind of address it in a way that's interesting, which I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. No, totally agree. And I didn't see that coming the first time around either. This is my second time. I actually saw this when it came out in theaters because I heard such good things. I don't usually run out to watch Ranveer Singh films because, as I mentioned before, his personality can get a bit grating. But I've heard enough good things about this that I wanted to go see it. And I was surprised at a lot of the things that it was approaching in ways that you don't typically see in these sort of 4-quadrant Indian big masala romance films.
Right.
But it does everything. It surprised me a lot, which is unusual at this point, that they can do something that surprises me still. But great, always exciting.
Well, and to your point, I mean, again, like something like a DDLJ for me, that was my initial entry point into these kinds of movies. And so, I mean, fairly or unfairly, that's kind of what I hold most of these movies up against, is the one that kind of, I don't know, did it the best, at least the way I was hoping it would be done. And I think it also has the best actor for any of these kinds of movies. That's, that is the thing here. Obviously, Ranveer Singh is a great actor, but he's no Shah Rukh Khan. I mean, because nobody is. And that's the thing. Like, I to your point about like his personality type, I like what Shah Rukh Khan brings to these kinds of roles a little bit more, because it doesn't seem like you mentioned, doesn't seem like as much of a put on. Here, it's a little bit of like Ranveer Singh is a little bit, he's putting it on a little bit, and putting it on maybe in the direction that's lesser than he actually is, which again makes this character, or more, depending on how you look at it, filtered or unfiltered. But I don't know. I think for me, these kinds of movies, these masala romances, Shah Rukh Khan is kind of the king of them, deservedly so.
Yeah. And I think, for one of one of the ways that I've very early on when I started writing about the films and programming them and sort of doing curation in both ways for these kinds of films was to not really consciously, but just kind of take them apart and figure, okay, what's going to work with a Western audience, what isn't going to work with a Western audience, which of these tropes of Indian cinema will translate and which won't, or which will be challenges. This is the kind of film that if it's your very first Indian film going into it, I don't think it's right, an ideal launch point. Because there is a little bit of inside baseball going on with the film. There are a lot of references to other films throughout, which is not uncommon because, cinema in India is not just a pastime. It's an obsession. And so everyone is expected to understand certain elements that crop in from other films. They're expected to know when someone whistles a certain tune that it comes from this movie, as happens at this certain point in this film. And if you are unaware of that, those things can be a little bit alienating. Not always. There are times where it happens and you just kind of understand that something is going on and you just but it moves so fast. One of the prime examples of that is a film like Om Shanti Om, which I know for a lot of people.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah, for a lot of people, it was sort of an entry point. For me, it was an entry point, was Om Shanti Om. And what really, when I first saw it all those years ago, 15, 16 years ago, was, it was just the everything, was the atmosphere of the whole thing that really took me in. And I had the vague feeling that like I was missing stuff, but it was all moving so fast and it was so entertaining that I just didn't care.
Right.
And in the years since, I've come to understand a lot, not all, not anywhere near all, but a lot of the references in that film and in other films. And so it's just comes with time. People my age that are living in India have been watching these films for 45 years. I've been watching them for 15, so I've had a lot of catching up to do. They're not ingrained in, they're not in my bones like they are with those people. But I work really hard to try and get there, and I still miss things all the time. But there are certain things about this particular film that could be a little bit alienating, but they're still kind of sweet. There's one particular segment of the plot that if you don't understand exactly what's happening, it gets a little bit confusing. And I think it's at the very, very end of the film, or near the end of the film, when there's a song and dance sequence that if you don't understand the original reference points and that they come from other places, it can be a little bit discombobulating.
Talking about the Devdas song part?
Yeah, the Devdas song. And it's not the only time that Devdas is mentioned. When they go to his friend's wedding and Rani's father's invited up to dance, which turns into this horrible fiasco. He asks for her family is Bengali. Devdas is a book by a Bengali author. It's been adapted in the Bengali language back in the 50s, and the one that people in the West are more familiar with is the one from 2002, which is the Hindi language version. And so when he goes to when he asks for a song to dance to, they offer him something from Devdas because that's just what people in the Hindi belt understand of Bengali culture is Devdas,
right.
but not the Bengali version of Devdas, their version of Devdas. And so you kind of see him shrug it off, like, okay, if that's all you got, like if that's all you know about Bengali, then just sure, I'll do that, So there's this culture clash that goes between her family and his family that is more than just, the idea in the film is that his family is this very prosperous family who owns a candy company or a sweets company that is just massively influential and successful, and they're very, very wealthy. And her family is this very sort of academically inclined, artistically inclined family from Bengali family that has moved to Delhi so that Rani can work at this TV station.
Right.
But the culture clash between the Hindi family or the northern family and the Bengali family is the main gist of the conflict between the two groups. And that, unless you understand a little bit about that, and my understanding is still pretty minimal, it can be kind of confusing as to the levels at which this is working, because that's something that people in India understand. The idea of people from West Bengal that are those Bengali families are automatically assumed to be sort of more esoteric, more sort of artistically inclined intellectuals, that kind of thing. And that's what her family is, and if you don't know that about the cultures in India, then it just feels like this family is just kind of sitting here. They're just a bunch of nerds,
Right.
But it's not exactly the same thing. And you can see the sort of alienation that he feels when he goes into their home and immediately, points at a portrait of Rabindranath Tagore and asks if that's their grandfather. Like, no, it's the greatest author in all of, contemporary Indian literature.
Right.
That he just wouldn't know because he's this, like you said, this sort of ding dong who doesn't speak English very well, which is adorable and infuriating if you're not quite sure why the subtitles are messed up in the film. Which is another cultural thing. It's the subtitles are intentionally written in sort of pidgin English because that's how he's speaking, is in sort of a pidgin English, because he hasn't learned it properly. He's just sort of, you can tell, picked it up from TV and picked it up from social media the best he can. And so everything he says is just not quite right.
Right.
He wasn't educated in that way. There's a lot going on.
Well, and to your point about kind of the inside baseball of it all, yeah, it's, it reminds me, it does remind me of Om Shanti Om a little bit in that regard, because again, like, I don't think it's necessarily needed to understand the idea of like why what is it about her parents that is making him seem lesser in their eyes, but I think the movie does a really good job of it. I think the movie lands at as much as it can for a Westerner who, like you kind of mentioned, I know even less than you do about exactly what you were talking about. But it did kind of come through and make sense once I did a little bit of the additional legwork, because, it doesn't necessarily make sense initially why they're all laughing at him when he's performing that song. And then, the scene afterwards does a really good job of explaining it, at least in as much as the movie can. Or at least as much as the movie's interested in doing. Because that's the thing, the Ranveer Singh character and the Alia Bhatt character, they're the kind of the movie's like differing mouthpieces at any one point. And it is interesting that her family, who are so smart compared to him, are willing to put up with him, even though he's a complete kind of a moron throughout most of the movie. And the thing with the subtitles, the first time I watched it, I was like, is this intentional? And then, it does it so many times. It's like, not only is it intentional, it's part of the characterization of this character, which for me, again, like, Karan Johar thinks of everything. And that's just one more thing that pushes the movie in terms of me and my ability to enjoy it. Every little thing is thought of in a Karan Johar movie. And even having the subtitles being kind of in broken English, because it's clear he doesn't know how to speak English, at least at the level that her parents have taught her. I like that the movie is never at any point saying, like, I'm not making you aware of what's going on. It may just not seem like it's intentional initially, but it totally is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's he is nothing. Karan Johar is nothing if not fully aware of everything that's going on on the screen. He fills every inch of the screen with something. So if your attention drifts for just a moment, you might miss it. There's always something going on. And it's I think the characterization between the two lovers in the film is it's believable because at first, just like, Rani is sort of, she's laughing at him the first time she meets him when he comes to her office to try and see if this person that his catatonic grandfather is pining for is actually the woman, her grandmother. And he goes to meet her in her office at this TV station. She laughs at him. She laughs at him, the second he leaves. She thinks he's ridiculous, which he is. And she doesn't take him at all seriously. So it's kind of, you're starting at a point where it doesn't feel like there's romance in the cards for these two because they are so different. But, we get to know the people beneath the facades that each of them have put up as the film goes on. And so it becomes more believable, and then things get complicated. There are several twists. When I was watching it the first time, there are twists later in the film that I would have certainly expected that really, really work in the film's favor. There's lots to enjoy here.
Well, and that's, to your point, the movie it's not all, again, told in a way that, I don't know, I don't think the movie needed to have twists, but I think that those twists later in the film do help kind of make it feel different and interesting, and again, not just like every other one of these movies, which it could have just fallen into that camp of it's a masala romance just being told with 2023, 2022 conventions. And it doesn't feel like that. It feels like the movie is really trying to pick apart the expectations of people now in terms of what it means to bring a partner to your family. Should your partner have to change for your family? Should your family even expect that they're going to? And what does all of that mean? And it's interesting to see that in an Indian movie, because I don't think in a lot of ways American movies are even having this conversation. Not this specific one. This has kind of fallen by the wayside, because when I think of romantic comedy dramas in American cinema, they tend to not have this generational component to it that feeds into the main story. Oftentimes it's just, the entire movie is what's the movie with Steve Martin and Alec Baldwin, where it's like, they're older and it's Meryl Streep's. Well, it's like an older romance. This is no, there's a lot of components here, but they all factor into and play into the main story, which is these two people falling in love. Which, to your point, the facade that they've created is fueled by these people who we get to see what their problems are, and they go on somewhat of a journey as well.
Yeah, if you go back to, Kabhi Khushi Kabhie Gham, the tagline for that film that Karan Johar came up with was, it's about loving your parents. And so there is this sort of generational aspect to Indian relationships in many, many, many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, that, American families and American relationships don't really concern themselves with at the same level,
Right.
When I got together with my wife, I hoped my parents would like her, but if they didn't, wasn't going to stop me from doing what I was going to do. Whereas in families like this, both of these adult children are still living at home with their parents, not uncommon in Indian society. And they, the plan was and remains for a lot of them to stay at home with their families, until they have, sometimes even after they have their own children, and then they just take over the family household when their parents pass away. Those multi-generational households are not uncommon. They're not every family, but they're not uncommon, especially for big families, affluent families like the ones that we have in the film here, which is, it's kind of a foreign concept, the level at which parents are involved in their adult children's daily lives.
Right.
Which happens a lot. In Kabhi Khushi Kabhie Gham, it happened, it happens.
It happens.
Yeah, it happens in a lot of films over there because it's reflective of the society. And what this film does is that it understands that, yes, that is a thing that can happen. And that is a thing that is a part of Indian society. And it's not necessarily a part it's not an archaic part of Indian society. It's just a part of Indian society. And that these kinds of relationships, and the kind of progressiveness this film is moving the Indian family tours can coexist with those older traditions. It just takes a little bit of flexibility on their part, which is kind of where all the conflict comes in, is trying to encourage these people to be flexible.
Right. And what's interesting is I would say that in a lot of these masala romances, that is ultimately the point, is the flexibility of the society and the culture that these things are contained within. Because again, to speak of the kind of conservative nature of Indian culture, I mean, again, in our society, it is looked upon very differently with a child living at home in their 30s. It's sure. If anything, it's viewed negatively. Or you live in your mom and dad's basement. I mean, that's kind of always the flippant aside that one would say to someone. But yeah, here it's not only acceptable, it's kind of expected in a lot of ways. And I think that it's interesting that the movie, like you said, it kind of says not only is it important, but other things, like it's important to be cognizant of what your family wants and how you are representing their legacy. But at the same time, like you mentioned with your own personal life, similarly with my wife, if her parents had said no, I don't think that changes my decision. And I don't know if it would change my wife's thoughts on being married to me anymore if something similarly happened to you. Like, that's the other direction that this story kind of goes, which is, we don't think this person is right for you. And what are you going to do about that if we say no? And again, in this story, they kind of push and pull, tug a back and forth on what does that mean. And I like where the film kind of ends up with that story. But at the same time, this kind of generational expectations are really, I don't know if they're ever not going to be in these kinds of Indian movies. Unless they get to a point where it's just everything is progressive. But I mean, again, I would assume it's probably more progressive now than it ever has been, just based on the way things are.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's, I don't know that it's incompatible with being progressive in any way. Those ideals can still certainly work. What I think is very interesting, and I mean, it's probably a bigger word than is necessary for this, but what is kind of noble about the film is that it has those conversations out loud.
Right.
There is the conversation like that they have very blatantly in the middle of the film, where they kind of decide they're going to be together, and then they have to, they get into an argument about who's going to move in with whose family, that sort of leads into the second half of the film's, the conceit of the drama. But Rani is not conceding that, oh, well, just because we get married, I will automatically move into your parents' house because that's what's expected of us. Why don't you consider moving into my house? What if I don't want to leave my family, even though that's what's kind of expected of Indian women, is to leave their family and move in with their husbands' families? And so, that discussion doesn't happen in that way very often. Like I said, and then that leads into the second half, where she gets the great idea of them switching households and seeing if they can, survive for 3 months with the other's family, which, everyone learns a bunch of, lovely lessons about what it means to be a good person, and, why someone is the way they are, and all that sort of stuff. It gets a little bit hokey here and there, but, not in a terrible way.
I mean, again, like in my mind, it's similar to all these other movies we've been talking about. There's like a Shakespearean level of drama to all of this, right? And that's where I think for me, and you've kind of alluded to it, like the hokiness of it, the contrived nature of the story, is them trying to really operate at like an elevated, I mean, it's high concept, right? Like, oh, you're going to go stay with their family and you're going to insert yourself into their lives, and we're all going to learn that we need to grow together. Like, yoy, right? Like, I mean, like it is kind of groan inducing, because that is far from how reality works. But using the filmic language and filmic conventions, this is how this works all the time. Is, you inserted yourself into their lives and you changed them irrevocably. Like, Jesus Christ, really, movie? But I mean, there's something about it that, again, like Indian cinema just kind of revels in the fact that it's operating at this high of, peak human emotions. It's operating with the broadest of strokes, which I appreciate. I mean, again, I think you get a lot of interesting performances from the actors when you're asking them to just go big for the most part. Like, just don't leave anything on the table. Go as big as you can. And I think everybody, for the most part, is going big in this movie. Maybe not loud, but they understand exactly what this movie is expecting from all of them, because they're all playing very much elevated versions of these kinds of characters.
Yeah, and probably the only characters in the film who are really grounded would be Shabana Azmi and Dharmendra and their relationships. Those two characters, for the most part, are really the only ones who are playing real people,
right?
I think, and that's required, because they're kind of apart from Rocky and Rani, who are going back and forth constantly. They are the emotional core of the film, and they're the reason for this whole thing to come together in the first place. And they end up in the climax. Spoiler, when Dharmendra passes away towards the end of the film, it's part of the conflict of the film is that this woman who fell in love with him 40 something years ago and had never stopped thinking about him, and he about her, and she wanted to attend his funeral rites, but his wife, who has never shown an ounce of love for anyone in the film, refuses her, or tries to refuse her entry to the funeral site. She's the only one who is consistently throughout the film acting like a real person. Real person with real emotions, that's not like playing some kind of game to do something or trying to manipulate someone or impress someone. She just found this guy that she fell in love with, and she wants to spend whatever time they both have, getting to know each other as best they can.
And I like that aspect of the film. And you're right, Dharmendra and Shabana Azmi are really, I mean, again, it's the part of the movie that I was like, oh, this is different. Like, I've really never seen this in another one of these movies. Because again, most of the time it just exists. I mean, like in a K3G, I don't know, it's being used as kind of the antagonistic point of the movie is, the parents are kind of misunderstood, and how do we understand them? There's none of that here. We understand these characters. It's just what they want is kind of not, I mean, again, acceptable in Indian culture, but I mean, again, stepping out on your significant other with someone else, I don't think is acceptable in any culture, best I can tell.
Right.
And obviously, like, that's the big kind of cultural sticking point of the movie is, what does it mean in a conservative society to step out on your significant other with someone else? And how does that affect you and the rest of your family down the road if that were to ever come out? And again, I think that the movie, it's not necessarily the conversation that it wants to have, but it does make an interesting case for, okay, just because the older generation does kind of have this different view on love and relationships doesn't mean at the time when they were the age of the characters in this movie, they weren't willing to kind of break the social mores then. Because that is ultimately what Ranveer Singh and Alia Bhatt's characters are about, is kind of breaking the expectations that you see when you see someone like this, which is he's a moron that can't change. And she's, I don't know if she's high strung in the movie, but she's a little high strung. I don't think that they don't paint her as kind of this, a nagging, rich girl, which they could have. I mean, again, because like, maybe not rich, but like, she's so conceited in how smart she is, and she knows she's smart, that she could run, laps around him. There's none of that. There's a little bit, but it's not as much as it could have been. And I don't think it, again, and there's other movies like this where it would have made her kind of, again, like a nag, and she's not a nag, thankfully. It's an interesting performance.
Yeah, I mean, and she does it at a point later in the film, when I think they're broken up at this particular point. It happens several times throughout the film. But when she almost, crashes into him head on, going the wrong way on the freeway, in order to, just talk to him. She does run down a list basically of her old boyfriends and how, stellar and intellectual and, successful they all were. It's for her, it's in an effort to show that, yes, I was with all of these successful people, but it didn't work. But I really want you, even though you are not this. But, I can imagine being on the receiving end of that, being him like, okay, so you're just going to tell me about all these, awesome people that you were with, and now I'm the dumbass that you're stuck with now.
Right.
Like it sounds different going out of one person and coming into the other person's ears,
Right.
And there's that sort of barrier, that communication barrier between the two, where they haven't quite figured out how to communicate, which is what relationships are all about. You have to learn how to communicate and how, communicating with each other, communicating about their feelings, is so important. Even when they agree, I don't know about you, but I've been in dozens of arguments with my wife over the last 10 years where we're saying the same thing, just in different words. And after a while, you're like, why are we arguing? We feel the same way about this. This is stupid.
Right.
Can we stop this, please?
Right.
Exactly. And a lot of this feels like that. There are genuine concerns between the two of them. They have to work out. But for the most part, like, they're the sort of, the Paula Abdul and MC Scat Cat, the opposites attract of the Bollywood film here is these two characters. They couldn't be more different.
Right.
But, somehow they fit.
I love anybody who makes a Paula Abdul MC Scat Cat reference, by the way.
Hey,
For all you kids out there taking 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. I think it is funny, though, because, again, it does have that. That, again, for me, is also part of these movies where it's like, Shah Rukh Khan and Kajol and DDLJ, like, again, it was a different kind of opposites there. I mean, but I guess it was similar but different, right? Because he was rich. He was rich and she was more, culturally in tune with the expectations of her parents. And there is some of that.
Not dissimilar.
Yeah, there's some of that here. I think that this movie is less interested in the old school cultural mores being ignored. I think this movie is saying, like, we know that we exist in a universe where we've already had parts of these conversations. Let's continue the conversation in the direction that those things have gone without necessarily retreading the same ground. And that's the thing. I mean, having these two actors in this movie coming out, fairly recently, 2023, I think it makes a case as just as important, if not needing to be mentioned in the same conversation as some of those other Karan Johar films, but also these masala romances that are, again, about where does your relationship fit into the grand scheme of your family? And what does it mean, ultimately, to be part of someone else's family in the way that they're part of your family? And what does that mean for your family members, too? Because that's the other thing about this movie. The family members, this movie is almost 3 hours long, that everybody is given a lot of time. A lot of time, which, again, in my mind, if you're going to do these kinds of movies, you do them right, which is you have to make every character feel fully formed because you're going to kind of put them through the emotional paces. And the movie's 3 hours for a reason, because I think at least every character in their family is a fully formed character in a way that if this were in an American film, they would just be supporting characters, maybe possibly just stereotypes. And these characters are far from stereotypes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of transformation and evolution that happens among the characters in the film. The only character I feel like, and I could be wrong in my memory of this, but there's the only one character that really doesn't do much evolving at all is Tijori, Rocky's father. Doesn't seem to change much throughout the course of the film, except in very, very subtle ways. He's a very stern father throughout the film. Doesn't seem to have much care for his children or his wife. he dotes on his mother, and that is pretty much seems to be his entire life, is doting on his mother, making sure that that she's okay, while his children and his other relationships have deteriorated to the point that they are almost non-existent, and he doesn't even realize it. But on the other side, you've got Ronnie's mother, who is this sort of hyper intellectual woman with a vocabulary that is absolutely ridiculous. In fact, it's comical most of the time, and they point out how comical it is. By one of them calls her their Shashi Tharoor, who is an Indian writer and intellectual who's sort of famous for using all of the words at the very bottom of the thesaurus to explain simple concepts. And it's kind of taking that woman and getting her back into her feelings, as opposed to being in her head all the time, which takes a minute. They do things, both sides do things to sort of intentionally or unintentionally alienate their guests once the families have switched, that are would be genuinely hurtful. The way that Ronnie's family treats Rocky as this sort of big dumb galoot, sort of stomping around, and then at the same time Rocky's grandmother just keeps trying to beat Ronnie down into being this subservient, quote unquote traditional Indian Hindu wife, and it doesn't work for either of them. It's highlighting the archaic nature of both sets of families. There's not one that's better than the other. It's just that they are, they have to learn that the world is different now, it's made very clear and very obvious on numerous occasions. The most obvious probably being segments in which Rocky's family is at a board meeting for their company, who has an ad that is not going over well because it's all about how women should be serving their men sweets at all times and should never stop cooking. That they point out in the board meeting had worked very well in the 80s, so why should we change it? And they were getting a lot of backlash for that. So it's interesting to see all these conversations happening, out loud in this way, as opposed to something that might be more subtle, maybe more, artistically pleasing, or, more of an art house vibe, which this does not have at all, obviously. But sometimes, you have those conversations in common language, they're going to reach, more people.
Right. Well, and you kind of mentioned the not subtlety of the movie's style. We kind of haven't mentioned the musical numbers, but I found the musical numbers to be rather charming. I mean, again, they fit perfectly within this kind of movie and what I expect from it. They didn't necessarily break the mold, as it were. But I think there were a couple fun songs, and, Ranveer Singh and Alia Bhatt are two pretty good people to lead a musical number. To your point about Ranveer Singh's personality, it comes through in the musical numbers. That's for sure. He definitely has a flair for the dramatic in a way that they definitely take advantage of in this movie over and over again in the musical numbers.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, if nothing else, his wardrobe in the film is
immaculate.
is something else. But he has, I won't put him on the same level because I just can't, but he has a similar feel in those moments to someone like Shah Rukh Khan, who, Shah Rukh Khan is not the best technical dancer in the world. He'll tell you that himself. What he does have is enthusiasm for everything that he's doing. So if you watch, he's getting a little bit older now, so he's stepped it down a little bit. But if you go back into the early 2000s or late 90s, he's thrown himself all over the place, and making up for what he may lack in technical skill with the kind of enthusiasm that really sells the moves. And I think Ranveer does something similar. He may not be the best technical dancer, but he's in it. He's in it to win it, which says a lot and can really cover up small flaws. He's not someone like a Hrithik Roshan who can do anything he wants with his body. Hrithik Roshan is an incredible dancer, but he acquits himself well. And Alia Bhatt, same. I mean, a lot of these musical numbers though are his numbers. I mean, the very first one that opens over the opening credits is all him. It's a song about how awesome he is.
Right. Literally.
Yeah, which is fun. Like it's a fun disco set, not disco set musical numbers in Hindi films these days. So it's good to see one of those. But Alia Bhatt does well also, even when she's just sort of following his lead.
Well, and to your point, I mean, again, I think there is something to be said for the theatricality to Ranveer Singh, because he knows what they're expecting of him, and I think he nails it. And yeah, I mean, look, the other thing about Ranveer Singh and Alia Bhatt are they're gorgeous human beings, right? I mean, that's the other thing, right? They're pretty people, and so they look great when they're on the side of a snow-swept mountain singing together. They look great together. So that's the other thing. It's always nice to see, again, the people making these movies go, oh yeah, we know that the camera likes to linger on them, and we're going to let it linger a little bit. And for me, that's just another one of those things about Indian cinema that I love. It's like, we're not going to stray away from what we know works, and also what we kind of know you expect, which is, pretty people being pretty, doing things together that, again, are maybe moving the conversation in a interesting direction, or at least in a positive direction. And that's the thing. This movie has a message, but it also has moments where you're just watching two beautiful people walk through the forest together. So
yeah, I mean, the film comments on that. It's from the very beginning. When Rocky meets Rani at her office, one of the first things she says is, "Did you forget to button your shirt?" Or mentions how he doesn't because there's literally one button at the very bottom of his shirt buttoned, and that's it. And he's obviously freshly waxed, oiled up chest is there, and it's there pretty much the entire film. Like, right. Buttons just don't seem to work on his body. And they don't ever shy away from that, because, if I looked like that, I probably wouldn't even bother with the shirt in the first place.
Right. Fair. I mean, again, like they you know what you're going to get when you get Ranveer Singh is what it feels like. And this movie does not stray away from that. And in something like Circus, where that's all it was, versus this, where it not only knows that, but kind of is playing with your expectations too. And the movie's playing with your expectations, but he is as well. I don't know. I mean, I'm here for it. This movie, for me, lived up to the expectations. I had heard pretty much nothing but good things about it for the last almost a year now, because the movie's been out almost a year. And I mean, yeah, I think it kind of makes a case for being mentioned in the conversation of Karan Johar's other movies like these, and some of the big ones of this specific genre in Indian cinema, which I think Indian cinema does these kinds of movies better than any cinema on the planet. Like the romantic comedy, I think Indian cinema has that nailed down, period.
Yeah, and a lot of those are going to be, Dharma Films, Karan Johar's company, Yash Raj Films. Those companies kind of have a monopoly on the big versions of this, right? Like this is a big film. You've got what we talked about earlier with Kabhi Khushi Kabhie Gham, those kinds of big overly emotional films. Aditya Chopra, who made DDLJ and also made Rab Ne Bana Di Jodi, which is another sort of Shah Rukh Khan film. It's not as big as this, but emotionally it is. It's more of a cartoony thing, but it's the same kind of feeling that you get from those films. And they're just, the good ones come along every few years. You don't get a really, really great one of these every year, which I wish we did, because this is the kind of stuff that I like to watch to pass a Saturday afternoon. Like it's good to just sit down and be in this world for a bit. That's so ridiculous. It's a ridiculous world. And it is, I mean, I cannot help watching this film and thinking how expensive every minute of this movie must be. because there's never a subtle moment. There's never a frame of film that is not art directed to, to the nth degree. I mean, and I remember seeing in the theater, the credits start to play at the end. Rocky and Ronnie get married. It's after the story, really. It's essentially a tag on the film as their wedding. And I remember being in the theater and the wedding starts playing and the wedding plays over the credits, and the audience was leaving my theater. And I was like, this was really expensive. You guys should watch this. Like, this cost them a lot of money, to put this wedding together. That doesn't look cheap, because there are dozens and dozens of extras, and a lot of the things is like with Indian films, especially films like this with these giant dance numbers, those aren't just extras. Those are talented, skilled performers performing a choreographed dance that took a lot of time to figure out. They have very expensive choreographers. If you didn't notice, at least one of the choreographers for the film was Farah Khan, who did direct Om Shanti Om and directed Happy New Year and Made Na and those other films. So like, there's the part of me that wants to stay in the theater through the credits just because, these people worked hard and blah, blah. But there's also like this final sequence of the wedding was just, it's insane. Like the level of detail that goes into it, and the fact that the people in the theater were so accustomed to it, they're like, oh yeah, it's just another song. We're going to go home. We're going to beat the traffic or whatever, but you can't make a film on that scale very often, unless you are someone like Karan Johar, Aditya Chopra, Rajamouli, there are Sanjay Leela Bhansali, who's, who made Devdas and who made, Bajra Mastani, who made Gangubai Kathiawadi, like all of these big films. There are a few filmmakers who kind of have the clout to say, well, I want to do this gigantic thing. And then, the producers will just throw money at them to get it done.
Right.
And Karan Johar being one of those producers can kind of throw that money at himself.
Well, and I like how you mentioned people leaving during the wedding scene, because I was like, this is going on for a while. Like this is going on for, I don't know if I need to see this, but there's a couple shots where I'm like, Jesus Christ, like, come on. Like I think it must be a drone shot or a crane shot. I'm assuming it's a drone shot at the end of the movie that essentially the movie fades to black. That's like, I assume that's what happens, but movie, you don't have to show me. Oh, you're going to show me, because that's the expectation, to the point where, like you mentioned, people are like, I've seen this a million times before. It's like, I mean, you kind of have. Like, most of the movies we've just talked about end with a wedding scene. If not, the next scene you would see would be the wedding scene.
Right.
I mean, did I need to see it though? I don't know. Karan Johar thought I did, clearly.
I think it's less that whether or not he thought we need to see it as he wanted to show it. He just wanted to flex a bit.
It adds to the heightened emotions of it. I think I said this maybe a long time ago, but action movies are to John Woo like romance movies are to Indian cinema. Like they're in a lot of ways, like it's operating at peak that genre. And like I said, I don't think any filmmakers are doing this kind of genre better than Indian filmmakers. Like there's something that they can get. The level of emotions that they get out of the actors is just, it's different. And I think people in India are also expecting everything to be really heightened, maybe even to a point where outsiders would call it like a level of melancholy we're not used to. But it doesn't bother me, because I find it to be really interesting that it's just like, we're painting with very broad strokes here. But the broadest of strokes, again, can be entertaining when every character is essentially just, there's not any one small character. Everybody's just big, and it's watching these big personalities bump around one another in a very kind of small room, as it were.
Well, the thing is that when American films do try to incorporate big performances like this, they typically are as, comedic relief.
Right.
Characters like this would be jokes. Like this would be a comedy if it were made with similar performances in America. This would have been a comedy film,
right? Ranveer Singh would have been played by Chris Hemsworth. Like you could see that, pretty. And
one of the things that I've noticed, going back to talking about Triple R, one of the things that was a reaction that we got from a lot of people, both in terms of fans and filmmakers and people in the industry that we sort of ran into along the way that saw the film and would talk to us about it, was that people outside of India who had never seen films like this just kind of thought that this level of performance, this level of heightened drama and melodrama just didn't exist anymore. Like they kind of forgotten that you could make movies like that.
Yeah.
And so I actually had a brief conversation. When I was at South by Southwest a couple of weeks ago, I was seated to watch a film a few minutes early with Simon Barrett, who is a writer who was one of the co-writers of the new Godzilla movie, Godzilla X Kong. And he was talking to me about how he had seen Triple R and was kind of reminded about, why can't we do this? Why can't we do this big emotional thing? Why can't we do these big action set pieces that are ridiculous but in an earnest way? And this may just be him sucking up to me or whatever. I don't know why he would want to do that. But he was saying that like after he saw this, he kind of went back to Adam Wingard, the director, was like, we got to step it up. Like this is the bar is here now. The bar is at this level after Triple R. In order to, if we're going to show people new things, we have to meet or exceed this bar. And that, for action, I've heard people talk about action that way with that film in particular, but I don't see anybody taking up the challenge as far as melodrama and romance goes when it comes to Indian films, because I just, how do you beat it? Like they've been perfecting this formula for 100 years. And while there are lots of failures, when they're good, there's nothing better.
Right. Literally. I would agree with you 100%. I would love for someone to point me at a romantic comedy that is as good as DDLJ is in every single moment of the film. And that, again, features two actors who are operating at peak performance. And this is, in the first third of their career, if not the first quarter of their career, that it still holds up, 30 plus, almost 30 plus years later. But to your point that they're still making these kinds of movies and they still have an impact is the most surprising part, because you would have thought people would have gotten sick of this kind of movie, because in our country, they did get sick of this kind of movie very quickly. And I think you kind of mentioned it, and I've, said it a million times on this show, and I'm glad you said it before I got to it. Cinema in India is not just something that people do on the weekend like it is here. It's a whole thing. Yeah. It's an entire day. They put the goddamn intermission there for a reason, because it is an event, and the expectation is everybody's going to be entertained. Everybody's going to there's going to be something for everybody. And this movie, similarly to the other movies we've talked about, is like that. And there is a little bit of everything for everybody, but at the same time, it is this specific kind of movie being made in the 21st century. And what does that movie look like? What does it mean to make a movie like that once all these other movies have already been made? So, yeah, I would rather only, if I'm going to watch romantic comedy, I'm going to watch an Indian film. That's the way that's where I'm at now, because are they the most realistic characters? No. Is it the most unconvoluted settings? No. But the emotions and the heights that they're operating at are just, there's, like you said, nobody is doing that as good, if anybody is even coming close. So
yeah,
they're big for a reason, and nothing is as big as Indian romantic films in American cinema.
And even the smaller ones are still, like, the emotions are big, and the stories are great. If you go back to Ranveer Singh's first film, it was sort of a breakout for most of the people involved. Band Baja Bharat was a very successful film. He was an unknown at the time. He stars opposite Anushka Sharma, who is in Rab Dabana with Dijodi with Shah Rukh Khan. It's like 2 years later, I think, 3 years later. And it's a pretty small story. Like, there are two people who run a wedding band business, and they sleep together, then have to figure out whether or not that's going to mean anything in their lives. Like, that's they have to decide whether or not they actually want to be together, if it was just a one night thing. And that's not an uncommon setup for like a Hollywood romantic comedy. Like there's a million of those. But the way it's treated is just different. The setting is unique. The emotions are heightened. It's, they can do this on all levels. I just get especially excited when they crank it up to 11, in films like this.
Well, and I think, this movie doesn't have the action hook that Triple R does, because Triple R's action hook is just, it's too good to be ignored. I mean, so much of the hook of that movie really is like some of those scenes in the movie that are just like, I've never seen anything like this before or since. And this movie doesn't have those kinds of hooks, but it has, it has a self-aware hook of, we're this kind of movie being made right now, and we need to address, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years of history of these kinds of movies in our movie. Because like you said, some of it is just, there are some ways to watch this movie that neither one of us will ever really be able to understand, unfortunately. And and it's unfortunate, but we can appreciate it to the best of our abilities, which is, I mean, again, you've been doing it a lot longer than I have, but we're both clearly seeing the same things, which is, this is something that just doesn't exist like this anymore here.
Yeah.
And to your point about someone like Simon Barrett seeing that, I'm glad to know that there are people in the industry who are seeing these things, because that gives me a little bit more hope for bringing a level of spectacle back to these kinds of movies that I think needs to be there. Because again, when you can just make one of these movies very pedestrian, like so many American films have been made, or Western films, when something like this comes out and it's really taking to task those kinds of movies and doing something different, it's like, well, why aren't they doing that here? Why are we doing that here? Oh, because we're not pushing ourselves, or the audience doesn't expect it. I mean, I don't think there's any one right answer, but I'm glad that we have, live in a time and a place where we can get easy access to these movies. Because look, this is on Amazon Prime. If you're a Prime, if you have Prime with Amazon, you have access to this movie. And 10 years ago, that definitely would not have been the case. I mean, there's still so many movies that I would love to talk about that are going to be impossible to talk about because there are no subtitled English versions. I mean, and that's a lot of these movies. So the fact that we're talking about this movie, which is readily available on Prime Video, I think is a good sign that I think hopefully maybe the conversation is getting a little bit more culturally diverse in terms of the kinds of movies people are willing and wanting to expose themselves to.
Yeah. It's the globalization of these big corporations has a lot of negatives, but access to, culture from other places is fortunately not one of them. Like, Amazon has a ton of Indian content, just an absolute ton. Netflix has quite a bit also. Netflix is probably better at getting it in front of people's eyeballs than Amazon is, because Amazon, if nothing else, they have a ton of content, but it's not really user friendly. It's hard to find stuff if you're not specifically looking for it on Amazon, which can be tricky. A lot of people probably have no idea that Hulu has a huge selection of Indian films, just absolutely massive.
They do.
That, if you weren't specifically looking for them and very careful to spell them correctly when you're searching, you would never, ever know. There's just a ton of stuff there. Even Tubi has a decent selection of Indian films. Like, Sholay's on there most of the time, and a bunch of other stuff. So it's available, but it's a matter of pushing it in front of people and saying, here, you're gonna like this, try this, And there's also the fact, you do have to convince someone to sit down for 3 hours in front of a single movie, which is even for me sometimes is a bit of a challenge to like. Well, I could watch 2 movies or 8 TV shows in that time. So you got to figure out where my priorities are for that exact moment. But, curation is part of it. I'm working on a couple of projects now to help get more eyeballs on those films and hopefully raise the profile of this stuff and, make it so that it's not the exception that something breaks out
Right.
it becomes more commonplace, and that people are looking to these films as something that is both commercially viable, that is aesthetically pleasing, that is, entertaining, because they are all those things, and I there's definitely room to grow. There's definitely room for the Indian film market to grow beyond its traditional audience. And, I'm kind of hoping that it happens fairly soon.
In our lifetimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm with you. I mean, again, I think we're probably in a day and age now where watching a movie with subtitles isn't that big of a deal. And, that kind of crowing point, I think maybe is getting more and more by the wayside. But yeah, I think to your point, just getting people in front of these movies is really, I mean, again, I think they kind of speak for themselves in a lot of ways. Would it be better if maybe they were, had audio English translation? I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of that, dubbing and, dubbing English over these movies where the entire performance is in Hindi. I'm not a huge fan of that. I haven't been a huge fan of that in manga or, anime or anything else. And I think that something is lost with a translated version as opposed to just reading the subtitles.
Yeah.
But to your point, I mean, I want more of these kinds of movies and more Indian cinema in general to be, to escape the seemingly very strong orbit of India. Because again, they have every reason in the world to not market these movies because they can perceive that they're not going to make any money. But I think that there are plenty of Americans and Western film-going audiences that would jump at the opportunity to see something like this that is similar to things that they've seen before, but through a cultural lens that people aren't as familiar with still. I don't think that Indian culture is imminently something that Westerners are bothering themselves with, let alone going out of their way to educate themselves about. And, I mean, again, I think a lot of it is there are plenty of cultural inroads here. I mean, Indian, for someone who enjoys Indian food, as I'm sure you do, you've been to India, I've been to India. I mean, Indian food restaurants, stuff like that, seemingly more common, more prevalent, more people going there than ever before, less just specifically Indian people. And I think that those are, I mean, again, anything and everything to erode people's preconceived misconceptions about what India is and Indian food can be, I think is a good thing. And a movie like this being readily available on Prime Video is pretty nice. Like you mentioned, Netflix and Amazon and Hulu have plenty. You could watch all of that and still have more to watch because they would have added more things in the time it took you to watch the stuff that's there now. So, yeah, I mean, look, you're doing everything you can. I'm doing everything I can. But yeah, I really was hoping that Triple R would have kicked the door further open than it did. I mean, it made a pretty good dent. I mean, again, I know more people that saw that movie than have seen any other Indian film, but
what it is doing, and this I know because I'm working with some people that are trying this. What it has done a bit is it has encouraged some people in India to take some chances that they hadn't taken before in terms of marketing, in terms of new release strategies, and in terms of trying to reach out, because there is an audience that is there for the right film. If the film's not right, it's not going to break out. That's just the way things go. But if the film is the right film for the moment, putting a little bit of extra muscle behind it could only help.
Right. Never a bad thing.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, I understand the sentiment of, Western audiences have no interest in this, but I think Western audiences are a lot more amenable to these kinds of things than anybody would give them credit for. But I do understand the sentiment of don't necessarily want to spend money. We don't have to. I get it. I mean, right now, I get it. So before we end the episode, is there any, given that this is Indian Cinema Month, anything that you would suggest on any of the streaming platforms that stand out for you? Because again, you're, for me, kind of the font of Indian cinema knowledge, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you what stands out right now that you would point people to if maybe they enjoyed this, or even if they wanted to see something completely 180 from a little love story between a goofy ding-dong and a very smart woman.
I'm looking. The problem with Indian films and on streaming services is they're so fluid.
Right.
They move off and on very, very frequently. So something that was on last month is not there now. I honestly, I don't have anything right off the top of my head that I know is currently available streaming. There was one that was a pretty interesting film that came out earlier this year from a filmmaker who I am very fond of, called Malakotai Valaiban. That was made by the director Lijo Jose Pellicer, who, if anybody saw Jallikattu a few years ago, that was his film about an escaped bull in a small Kerala village. That was a really excellent film. We showed it at Fantastic Fest. It showed at the Toronto International Film Festival. So that's Malakotai Valaiban is excellent. That's on Hulu. Again, you have to look that one up and figure out how to spell it. So sorry about that. And then there is his other previous film, which I think is also very good, which is called Like a Summer Dream, I believe is the English title. That one's on Netflix. And that one is about a man from Kerala, so Malayali, who speaks Malayalam, who stumbles into a village in Tamil Nadu and all of a sudden can speak the language and knows all of the people. It's sort of like a magical realist fantasy about this guy wandering into a town. It's very, very, very well made. It's a really excellent film that I really, really liked. There's a thriller on Netflix called Nayatu, another Malayalam film. Lots of Malayalam films I'm really digging right now. Nayatu is a crime thriller.
That's like the segment of Indian cinema I'm least familiar with is Malayalam. Like for me, it's like kind of unknown area.
Yeah, I'm finding a lot of like the really, really interesting things are happening there right now. You know, they don't do as much of this type of film like the Rocky or Rani. There's a little bit of that, but a lot of them are more sort of experimental or willing to take more chances. So those are all good. Minal Murali, another Malayalam film, is a superhero movie that Netflix produced that's really, really good. I think it's probably the first or one of the first superhero films from Kerala that did really well a couple of years ago. There's no end of Indian films on the streaming platforms. I don't know. Is Om Shanti Om still on Netflix? It was there for a minute.
It was when we recorded the episode on it. It was on Netflix.
It still is. So if you have not seen that, please go watch that. It's one of my absolute favorite movies.
It's a fun one. I like Om Shanti Om a lot. I think we recorded the episode on that last year in 2023 for Bollywood Cinema, so it'll come out sometime this year. That's a good one. I mean, I think for me, I'm partial to Shah Rukh Khan. He's, I mean, for me at least, and Hrithik Roshan is a close second.
K3G, you get both of them.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, K3G is great, but I still I think gravitates towards DDLJ a little bit more because I don't know. DDLJ is just kind of a perfect movie. I think it's so good in so many ways that other things try to live up to. But yeah, I think to your point, definitely poking around online streaming services is something that if you're a fan of these kinds of movies, or if you are amenable to the idea of kind of doing further research, streaming platforms kind of make it easy. They have spots for these things. I mean, tracking down a specific thing, to your point, can be kind of a pain in the ass if you're not exactly sure how to spell it, but we have Google. You can get there, folks. And I mean, again, I know The Office is great, watching it for the umpteenth time, but these kinds of movies, I think, are, for me, the future of cinema, because they're keeping cinema exciting and they're making movies that are uniquely their own thing in a way that, I mean, again, so much of everything we watch now that comes out of this country feels very samey. And look, there's samey movies coming out of India, just like there is anything else. I just think it's a broad enough place where you can go into different pockets and see very specific things being done that are a lot more interesting than rather uniform filmmaking landscape that we have here. Tend to follow certain kinds of trends. So
very true.
Final thoughts on Rocky or Rani?
Iga. You can always find Iga also.
Iga's amazing. I had never seen anything like Iga before. That might be the craziest Indian cinema film I've ever seen. Like, that might be one of the craziest movies. I know.
Yeah, that's my baby. So I want everyone to go see that.
I love how that movie is your baby, because like it kind of feels like a perfect movie to be the champion of. Like, it's such a weird ass movie in the best way. I remember showing the trailer to people and them just being like, is this for real? Like, oh yeah, it's for real. And it's a lot more endearing than it has any right to be. It's, I don't know. Iga is one of those movies where I'm really excited for the episode to run on that, but it'll be another 6 months probably. Iga, I mean, I don't know. Iga's just, I'm with you. Like, if you watch any Indian cinema, just go watch Iga, frankly. Like, and if you don't like what you're seeing there, maybe I can't help you. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if I can help you really. So final thoughts on Rocky or Rani?
Rocky or Rani, Kii Prem Kahaani is it's a lot of fun. It's the kind of big Bollywood romance that I really enjoy. That, like I mentioned many times, we don't get as often as we probably should. If you're a fan of romantic films and you've never seen an Indian film, this is not a bad place to start there. We talked about a lot of different Indian romance films, but this one it feels very contemporary. It feels very of the current day, and I think it does it in a way that isn't as preachy as it could have been, because there's a lot of concepts in here that are very topical to the current social situations and political situations, and it could have been very preachy, but it manages to handle everything with a pretty deft hand, and I really, really enjoyed it.
No, I'm right there with you. I mean, again, I didn't know what to expect other than it's a pretty well-made movie, and it's got Ranveer Singh and Alia Bhatt in it. But I mean, to your point, yeah, this is I think for me, the movie lived up to the expectations that I had, for sure, and kind of everything I'd heard about it. And yeah, I mean, look, I think this is now the best thing I've seen Ranveer Singh in so far.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen as many of his movies as I would like, but in terms of the best performance that he's done, I think this is better than in Circus. Maybe, I mean, again, Gully Boy is a very different kind of movie. And movie's not even in the same sphere as Gully Boy, but I like what they have Ranveer Singh doing in this kind of movie, because I think his personality and the character that he is seemingly in real life, I think it meshes well with what this movie's expectations are. So yeah, no, I'm really glad I finally sat down and watched it, and I'm glad that you and I were able to talk about it. So we'll take a break, and we'll play a couple ads, and we'll play a preview for the next Kulturecast.
Hi, I'm Susan.
And I'm Sharon. And we're the hosts of 80s TV Ladies.
Check us out wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
And please like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at 80s TV Ladies.
You can find interviews and exclusive behind-the-scenes content on all of your favorite 80s TV ladies.
80s TV Ladies is the place to go. Please join us.
Hi, this is HP from Noise Junkies.
And this is Father Malone from Dark Destinations.
Please join us as we examine one of the greatest sitcoms in television history, Taxi, on Night Mr. Walters, a Taxi podcast.
Good night, Mr. Walters.
Good evening, and welcome to Night Gallery.
Thank you, Rod. And I want to welcome everyone to Midnight Viewing, where once a month we talk all about your follow-up to The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling's Night Gallery.
They say it's Rod Serling's Night Gallery, and it isn't really Rod Serling's Night Gallery, it's somebody else's.
Oh, we know. We talk about it a lot. Your curators at Midnight Viewing are the projection booth's Mike White.
What can happen to human beings when trust is wiped out by suspicion?
And Kulturecast's Chris Stachiw.
Small boy encased in a crystal ball.
And I'm Father Malone.
The kind of thing that usually infests nightmares.
Join us monthly at Midnight Viewing, the Night Gallery podcast at weirdingwaymedia.com.
Doesn't remotely belong to me. I have no proprietary interest in that at all.
खातिर मेरा इंतकाम लेना मेरे भाई से, उसकी उन दोनों आंखों में गोलियां दागना जिन आंखों से उसने तुम्हारी मां पर फरेब डाले थे। चले ही चले दिए से चले रहे सारी जिंदगी, वरना तू भी डिसअपियर हो जाएगा अपने बाप की तरह।
मैं खुद के अपने भाई गायब है कई महीनों से।
डिसअपियर्ड लोगों की बीवियां आधी बेवा कहलाती हैं यहाँ, हाफ विडोज।
एक फूंक से मियां सब उड़ गया धुआं, वो जो सांस की एक फांस थी वो निकल गई जो खराश थी।
I've loved you more than my life.
वो खलिश गई।
माँ जब झूठ बोले ना नहीं अच्छी लगती। दिल की दर्द सुनो तो है, दिमाग की तुम्हें नहीं, जान लो कि जान दो। मैं रहूं कि मैं नहीं, बदला
हेलो हेलो माइक टेस्टिंग 1 2 3 हेलो, आवाज आ रही है आप लोगों को? हेलो 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 हेलो।
So right on the next Kulturecast, we are going to be talking about yet another Indian film. I'm going to be joined by Spencer Parsons for that one. We're going to be talking about Hater, which I believe is that, I think that's the Macbeth one or Hamlet. It's one of the two, I believe. Have you ever seen that one?
I have not.
Okay, I believe it's a Shah Rukh Khan movie even. But I'm looking forward to talking about it because it's one of those movies that has been, well, I guess it's not Shah Rukh Khan, but it is, it's Hamlet though, which, I mean, I'm interested to see kind of, you know, what that's going to be, because again, you know, culturally interesting to adapt Shakespeare as an Indian filmmaker.
If Vishal Bhardwaj, the director, has made a bunch, like that's kind of his thing, is making Shakespeare adaptations. So he's the best at it. Yeah.
Well, until then, Josh, where can people find you and the things that you work on?
You can find me at Potentate Films on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me at Hateful Josh on Twitter. And you can find my writing at ScreenAnarchy.com.
And people can follow you on Letterboxd, or that's
Letterboxd. Same Hateful Josh on Letterboxd, Hateful Josh on Twitter also.
I've just recently started using my Letterboxd more. The case was made for me to use it, so I'm trying to do better about it. And then I don't have to wonder.
You can track the hundreds of Lifetime movies I've watched this year. I can't stop. I don't know what's wrong with me.
I see you posting about it on Facebook. I'm like, at some point he's going to run out of things to watch. He has to, right?
Oh, never run out.
You've merely scratched the surface of these kinds of films.
Barely, yeah.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, well, I mean, you know what? At least you're not being forced to watch them. You're watching them by choice, which I think is...
They're fun. I think they're very fun. They're not always great cinema, but I'm usually entertained, so that's a good thing.
Well, I don't talk about those movies, but if you want to follow me, you can follow me on Instagram at Papa Stash, and you can follow everything that I work on, and along with a whole host of other things over at weirdingwaymedia.com. We are an award-winning podcast network. 80s TV Ladies picked up 3 podcast awards at the Podcast Awards last year, and actually, as of today, the 2nd of April is nominated for Best Indie Podcast for the Webby Awards. So if that is a thing that you want to help support us through, go on over to the Webby Awards and vote for 80s TV Ladies, and check out weirdingwaymedia.com, where this show and so many other shows can be found. So, Josh, thank you so much for joining me. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And as always, we'll catch you on the next episode.